Hello and welcome to episode 65 of The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. If you're into wine or music or both, you are going to love this show, so stay tuned. We will discuss the unusually close connections between the music and wine industries, with terms like vanity label applying to both. But first, allow me to introduce our fascinating panelists. Jay Boberg was the co-founder of the seminal 1980s label IRS Records before going on to run MCA Universal. He's now the co-owner of Domaine Nicolas J, a winery in Oregon's Willamette Valley with revered Burgundian winemaker Jean-Nicolas Maillot. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you, Catherine.
And Sheri Hood is a winemaker in Portland. Her label is called The Pressing Plant. And in her former life, she ran the American branch of the British record label 4AD and managed bands including Stereolab. Welcome, Sheri.
Thank you.
And Courtney Taylor is the lead singer, guitarist, and co-founder of the band The Dandy Warhols. And he is the owner of the very special space we are recording in today. It's called The Old Portland, and it's a wine bar here in Portland, Oregon. And Courtney, thanks for joining us. Thanks for hosting us. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your bar?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of what I remember bars being that bands hung out in the 80s and 90s, you know, a little grungy and not seemingly permanent. And then I want that kind of easygoing dive vibe, but then I want really high-end French wines. And
French wines? What about Oregon wines, Courtney?
occasionally they fall into the category of what I like. So
Good.
yeah, I would definitely have this one that Jay made, that he and his guy made. That we were just talking about. What is it called?
Red vinyl.
Red vinyl. It's cool. Ironic that it does suit my palate, and it is named after a indie record color vinyl pressing.
Exactly. It's where we came from.
Wow. Yeah, it is.
So, yeah, we'll be tasting everyone's wines while we're talking today, so we'll see if we can keep the conversation on track.
Right.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, thanks. Well, let's dig into our first course. Does music make wine better? There's long been a philosophy in the winemaking community that grapevines respond to music, and music in the cellar can affect the outcome of a finished wine. I've spoken with winemakers about this concept, but I've never spoken with music professionals. So, Sheri Hood, let's start with you. Have you ever tried playing music to your vines or to your wine in the cellar? Have you ever tried a wine and music pairing? What's the relationship between wine and music?
So for me, I like to bring music into everything that I do. It's hard not to, you know. For the wine, I don't own vineyards, so I don't have any control over playing music to the vines. But with the cellar, it's important to me to have music playing that I love during the kind of like the crucial parts, or the parts that are important for me to really be paying attention specifically when I'm with the grapes. So that would be when the grapes come through and go on the sorting table, and then are destemmed for Pinot Noir, and that would be things like pressing, or all the way to racking and to bottling. And what I think with that, the biggest influence that music has in those moments is that it has that influence on me, that it really makes me connect with who I am in like just in the world in general, and it gets rid of all the busy thoughts and what I might have brought in there when I'm thinking about having for dinner, or what I should have said in that conversation, or anything. Like, it all just drops away when I hear music that moves me, that makes me feel alive. So it affects me, and by that it affects the grapes and the wine.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've never really thought about that, but you know how a song kind of affirms who you are, right? It affirms your balance of yourself, how aggressive or how passive, or
there's a lot of identity that people connect with,
and it really makes your problems go away. Yeah, put yourself in the best place you can to taste wine and decide what is you and what isn't about it. Right, play the music that is you.
But
You know,
then-
when we're
oh, go
making
ahead, sorry.
when we're making wine, we have music on all the time. But that, much like you, Sheri, I've ever since I was 5 years old, I had music on all the time. I mean, I have music on. I don't think the grapes are influenced by the music. I agree with you. It's the people that are actually making the wine. So the idea of playing music in a vineyard with grapes hanging on vines, I just don't buy.
Right, singing to your
Oh,
grapes.
I have to say though, has anybody
don't
here?
know. We
Has
don't
anyone
know.
here seen the documentary "The Secret Life of Plants"?
Yes.
Yes.
Which Stevie Wonder also did the album and was
Yes.
in, and that is really amazing. You know, the whole, what was it, 60s, 70s, and all of, you know, they hooked plants up to polygraph test, I think, and watched their reactions to people's own stress and to things like someone coming in and hacking up the plant next to it and stuff like that. I cried. I'm a vegetarian at that moment. And those are the things
You
that
didn't become
I think
Carnivore
it's
only?
possible, but the point I was going to make was that the fact that what really has influence is what you were describing, which is the music that's being played when you're making. Because you develop,
puts you in the place to
it puts you in
truly
that
know
place.
what you like or don't like.
And you develop, when you're making wine, when you're doing pump overs, and a lot of it's quite arduous. I mean, after you've harvested the grapes and you've sorted them and you've gotten them into the fermentation tanks, a lot of the work is doing pump overs twice a day,
Stop
doing
saying
things
that.
for many different days, where you're sort of building this relationship. And as the fermentation goes, and I'm sure you see this, you see the change, and you start to develop a relationship with the Momtazi vineyard or with the Nisa vineyard or whatever it is, and they take on characteristics. And so the music that we play while we're doing it is actually part of that whole chemistry of what's going on. And I think it's really important. The other thing is when people come to visit you in our house in Dundee, which is where we do our tastings, we have an old 1906 house, we always have music playing. And that music is, of course, a connection to my background, but it's also connecting the environment. I mean, having a particular music on, and you were mentioning the difference between having certain music versus having the Serge Gainsbourg, and how it changed the vibe of your bar. We tend, in the tasting room, we tend to play things that aren't, screaming loud. It tends to be a lot of jazz. We'll play Pat Metheny. We'll play we'll play Serge Gainsbourg. We'll play Pink Martini.
Right.
We'll play,
Oh, yeah, I'm sure that's a big wine tasting band for sure. So what do you play?
Oh, I don't have a tasting room.
Cocteau Twins?
I don't have a winery.
Oh, yeah.
But I name my wines after songs that they make me feel like during the process. So I get to share that music with people, whether it's
Wow.
Nick Drake's Brighter Later from the Chardonnay, or this 2015, the new vintage is Lust for Life.
Is
Should
this
we taste Lust for Life?
It's a
while
great
we're-
concept.
Sure.
Is this Chardonnay called
Brighter Later.
Brighter Later? Mm-hmm. God, that is genius.
It's a great
It is a
idea.
bright wine, too.
Yeah, exactly.
That
It makes me.
you are
It just makes
good.
me feel like that with
Amazing.
the energy. I really think that two of the things that music and
Thank you.
wine have in common are that for me, my reaction to both of them are a feeling. It's not this music is this way. I like this song because of this, because the structure is different. It's not about that, and it's the same for wine. It's a feeling that I have.
Yeah, when
Well, it's
you're
an emotional connection.
when you're a
is what-
young
is what-
musician, you try to deconstruct
It's visceral.
music and try to figure out why you like certain songs and not
No.
other songs. What I did,
Yeah.
and every musician I know did,
Right.
and that's
You're a
kind of
musician,
probably
that makes
what
sense.
put us on to that track. And I've done the same thing with wine. I've gone to so many tours and talked to so many winemakers. I can't figure out any consistency.
I wanted to just
You.
bring it back to the idea about the vineyards, and I was just reading something interesting about how one vineyard, that they played music to the grapes, and that a couple of different studies, and they're not really studies in quotes because it wasn't. It was somebody's experience in trying this, but was that the way that it affected the vines in the vineyard was that the vines showed more growth, so were more vigorous, that there was earlier ripening. And one thing I read was that it was led to more balanced vines, which I think is really interesting. And whether or not it's true or not, the idea that paying that much attention and sharing something that those people love. They must be sharing music they love and not music that they
I was going to ask you, what music were they playing?
It's all classical. Everybody's, much in the image of wine. It's still very
winery?
classical, or it's jazz. But it's mostly classical out there. But I think that it reminds me of why a lot of wineries or vineyards are going biodynamic, and that is
Which is, I'm just going to break it
Oh,
and say
sure,
it's kind
yeah.
of style of farming that's almost beyond organic, but keep going.
and adheres to a protocol, and which not everybody, which I don't understand all of the protocol of why Rudolf Steiner suggested this protocol, but I think ultimately it's the care and attention to nurture the vines, or in the winery to nurture the wine that is helpful. I mean, it's certainly...
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's a living thing, and there's going to be a myriad of subtle things that we can't even sense that are obviously going to be happening. And sound organized is music, generally. So on root level, that's what we think.
And every year you make wine, it's a different painting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're starting out from scratch. It's not like you may be using the same vineyards and you may be using the same varietal, it may be Pinot Noir or whatever it is, but based on the weather, based on what's happening, based on all of the decisions that you make throughout the winemaking process, you're painting a different picture
Every night
year.
playing the same songs. They're new songs. AC/DC records. same guitars, same amps, same settings, different record every time.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to cut in here, and just in case listeners want to learn a little more about what Sheri was referring to, you can Google the Cignosi family of Paradiso di Frassina in Montalcino, Tuscany. They play Mozart in their vineyards. At De Morganson in Stellenbosch, South Africa, they play Baroque music in their vineyards. Jean-Charles Abatucci of Domaine Comte Abatucci in Corsica plays his traditional Corsican polyphonic songs over loudspeakers in his vineyard.
Makes great wine. I don't
Makes
know about
great
the
wine.
music, but that's
In the vineyard and the cellar. I feel like Alois Legator plays, I've been in his cellar. I feel like he plays music in his cellar. I should have looked that up. And that is in Trentino Alto Adige, northern Italy. Many Canadian vineyards, this is a big deal in Canada, play music in their vineyards. And there's even a winery called Wine and Sound where they have a sound studio and musicians are invited to record albums. And I guess the bottles of wine are all around the studio. And
We recorded at a winery studio in Ribeiro del Duero that had the guy who redesigned Abbey Road do the sound design for this tiny studio. It was very productive.
nice
actually.
place to record.
And actually,
yeah.
that reminds me, I've been to Miraval in Provence, and there's a fabulous old sound studio there. There was a famous jazz musician who owned the property, I think in the 80s.
Really?
Yeah.
At Miraval.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's interesting.
I'll have to ask my Provençal friends and maybe try to record there.
Yeah, you should.
Nothing like recording in a winery.
Well, if you're friends with Brad Pitt, you could record
Who's
there.
not drinking?
Oh, no?
Yes, he's on the wagon.
Oh.
That is very strange. Scarecrow, Scarecrow, like cold, high-end, oldest vines, pre-phylloxera vines, the only holdouts, right? Was Scarecrow.
Scarecrow being?
Their own rooted.
The vineyard next to Coppolas Cupolas. And he doesn't drink. He doesn't drink.
I don't drink.
Well, there you go.
So, I mean, in terms of this industry, when you've been around in this industry so long, sometimes it's time to make some changes.
Yeah.
And that doesn't change things in terms of what we do technically. My business runs a lot better being sober than it did before. So those are just changes. I've met a lot of people, chefs and winemakers and sommeliers, that all feel they do their job better or at least as well.
Well, I think that's actually a great segue to our next topic, which is why do so many music people go into wine? I think there is a very close association between the music industry and alcohol, and sometimes it can be.
Yeah, I can tell you right off, when you get to a certain level as a band, alcohol is free and it's always there. It's always available.
It's the same when you're in a winery. It's always there. Always.
Even in a bad year.
Always.
So let's move into this next topic. Why do so many music people go into wine? We have here a record executive, a recording artist, a band manager. All of you are now in the wine industry in one capacity or another, and there seems to be an unusually strong connection. We've just been speaking about it. Jay Boberg, have you noticed that there are a lot of music industry folks in the wine industry, and why do you think that is?
Yes, I have, is the short answer. There is an inordinate amount of connections between music and wine. I have my own theories as to why. I think that people that are drawn to music are drawn to a creative process, an expressive process, a process where you're creating something that has a uniqueness to it and has a personal statement and a personal point of view attached to it. And I think you can say all of those things about music and about wine. But since we launched Nicolas Leger, our first vintage was 2014, but 2016 is when we actually released the first vintage, the 2014. And traveling around the country and visiting people and doing tastings and so forth, it was unbelievable how many people I came across that were at a restaurant, were running a restaurant. They were in the business side of the business. This woman, I went to Whole Foods. It was Northern California Whole Foods wine buyer, and she says, "Oh, don't you remember me?" And I'm looking, going, "Okay, no, I have to admit I do not." And she said, "You brought the Go-Go's to Kemp Mill Records in Washington D.C. in 1981, and I was the store manager of Kemp Mill, and now I'm buying all the wine for Whole Foods in Northern California." And lovely lady, and we had this great conversation about all the IRS bans and about the business in the day and so on and so forth. And I could give you, dozens and dozens of examples of that are just like that. And so it seems to be that the things that people that go into music, for the most part, at least the people that I think all of us connected with, were the people that were in music because they were truly passionate about it. They, like we talked earlier, got up every morning. There was music was the soundtrack to their life. It moved them. And I spent my whole time in high school and college. I was buying records and turning people on to bands. And I eventually got to start a record label where I found bands and I got to turn people on to bands. It just ended up being a profession. And I think wine is very similar in the sense that when people discover something that they really love, they want to share it with other people. And so wine lends itself to that.
It's also a very affirming high. Wine isn't a sloppy high. It's not like a hard alcohol high. It's really, you're conscious and you're wistful and positive, and I think that's what people probably have a similar desire for music that makes them feel a similar way.
Takes them to a different place.
Absolutely.
I think also that that both bands and touring and making wine are both involve lifestyle and awareness of a lifestyle, and are about that one's life it follows the creation. That the most important thing is to make the best wine one could make and to play the best music. But in order to do that, you have to be enjoying, what you're doing, and so there's this idea that there's time. None of us work 9 to 5 jobs. On the wine side, it's 6 to 10.
The risking your life for this passion.
Yes.
That's right.
Is that
Yes.
Which musicians do and winemakers do.
Yeah, and you don't always
both of them.
enjoy it all the time. I mean, that is, you're scared a lot of the time in the creation of the beast.
Well, that's because you're putting yourself out to being vulnerable. When you make a record, you're making a record for yourself. You're not crafting. In fact, the bands that were successful never said, "I'm going to sit down and write a hit single."
Yeah, that's entertainment. That's a different business.
Correct.
Really.
They were creating music for them that they believed in, that came from right out from them. When you're making wine, Jean-Nicolas and I always talk about, we're making wine that we want to drink. And we're just hoping there's enough other people out there that like what we like. But we're not making it for a market. We're not making it for a price point. We're not making it for someone else to get points or any of that kind of stuff. And so I think both creative aspects, you take a lot of risks.
Passive-aggressive acts. long extended acts of passive aggression.
Well, at least you get feedback on the music quicker because you take it out there and you play it live.
Takes us 2 years to make a record, so 2 to 3 years. So.
Right, but I'm saying you get the feedback when you play it live, right? You get that, you can tell when that audience is really responding. Wine is a much longer, you have to wait a lot longer to get the feedback.
Well, it took me about 10 seconds to tell you that was my favorite Oregon Pinot I ever had.
The red vinyl.
Yeah, that took me 10 seconds. So there's some turnaround.
Instant
quick turnaround.
I appreciate that feedback, Courtney.
Yeah. And it's also interesting the way that you're talking about, because that you talk about music is exactly how real artists or real effed up people that make music that are very successful at it talk about the music they make. You know, the Dandies are my favorite band. We are absolutely the perfect band.
I would hope so.
As far as I can tell emotionally and psychically, you know.
And those are the kind of bands I always tried to sign, and I'm sure the ones you tried to manage. If you're not convinced, then how is the rest of the world?
Did you sign the Flesh Tones?
Yes. Peter Zaremba.
Unbelievable. Why didn't you call what's his name from ELO, Jeff Lynne, and have him produce a record for them?
That might have been a good idea.
They're hit after hit after hit, produced by your buddy that owns a studio that you have a great time at, and he's good, but he's just not Jeff Lynne. You know, they would have had 40 number one singles. I mean, they were soul and they were psych and garage. They're the best songwriters ever. Zaremba's the coolest singer. Those guys are amazing.
Did you see any of the Cutting Edge TV show that we produced that he was the host of?
Yeah,
of course.
Peter Zaremba was the host. He was a fantastic TV host.
Yeah,
He's better than most.
I was exactly that age. You know, I was 15 or something.
Fantastic.
You know,
I used to go see them at the 9:30 Club on Flesh Tones weekends, and they would. So you could see them like 2 nights in a row, and just like so much fun.
And you know the market that they were the biggest
Not drinking
in?
wine. Sorry, Catherine.
I was going to say.
I wasn't.
Bring it back to wine,
tie
people.
in with the wine there for.
All right, we'll come back to wine.
we'll come back to the Flesh Tones.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to throw in some ideas. I picked some brains of friends who used to be in the music industry and are now in the wine industry. There are so many of them. Actually, Jay and Sheri, you probably know Scott Wright and David Millman very well. Scott Wright, who founded Scott Paul Winery in Oregon, is now the Cavo Selections direct importer of Champagne and Burgundy, and David Millman runs Domaine Drouhin, Oregon. Scott Wright used to be known as Shadow Stevens. He was a DJ on the East Coast, and David Millman worked for you, Jay.
He worked at IRS Records. He was our publicist.
So both of them...
He's a fantastic guy.
Both of them said they got into wine because the expense accounts are so big in the music industry.
Me too. I was just going to ask that.
That was not the case at IRS Records. I just want to tell you that.
So that was a subsequent job that
But maybe at MCA.
David
At MCA, the expense account was good. Absolutely. I was well into wine at that point.
And then Lee Barkley, who is the sommelier wine director at Il Caminetto in Whistler, BC, he studied classical trumpet before he got into wine, and he was telling me that it was kind of interesting. He said, if you study classical music, your test consists of listening to music and blind identifying the composer, the instruments, the era, the genre. And in wine, you have to blind identify wine if you're a sommelier. He said he feels that wine and music are analogs because they both represent a time, a place, and a person. I thought that was kind of deep and interesting way of looking at it.
I think I'd read something that I'm going to read it. That Mike D had said, and he said that wine is similar to music in that it's a purely experiential realm, and it's a purely subjective practice. And he goes on to say that it's kind of a funny thing that criticism of both, wine criticism and music criticism, which we all depend upon to be interested in what to buy, etc., or to sell our wines, is also experiential and subjective. So it's going from that experience. So I think that it kind of goes back to that, the visceral reaction to wine or to music, and that's why we don't all have to have to be moved by the same music or by the same wine. And of course there are ways to rate things, and there are defects and things like that in wine, but I think that more of that feeling that comes in. And it's never recreated, right? Because we're in this place now, and then we'll be somewhere else, or you're with someone that you love, or you're with somebody and you're breaking up, and like you're not going to love that wine, maybe, all of those things,
It's true.
Which is what I run into with, the records we make. I spent all night drinking Greek wine, white wine with Robert Smith from The Cure. And
As one does.
I had never really had white wine. I didn't really care about white wine at the time. And the atmosphere and the open air and we went all night. I mean, it was just, he kept ordering another bottle. We were early-ish, so I couldn't afford to do that, but boy, he sure could. And I ran into him and 13 Tales was his favorite record. Ran into him a few years later, and I asked him if 13 Tales is still his favorite record. He said, no, I can't listen to that anymore. I broke up with that chick. that bird.
When I managed the Cranes, they opened for The Cure, not on that tour, not for that album, and Robert Smith, I was just amazed to watch every night that he would break out these beautiful Spanish red wines, and he'd mix them with orange juice. That was his thing to be able to. Yep. And so a quick sangria, and in order to be able to drink for a longer, enjoy it more, or whatever.
Wait, but you had me at enjoy it more. You lost me at enjoy it more.
I know. Perhaps that was not the. Enjoy drinking longer. How about that?
Yeah.
Hydrating while, but it was
sugaring up.
Heartbreaking.
I know, yeah, I do love those Spanish wines too. There are wines I would definitely cut with juice.
I think going back to the music and
they're both fruits, right? It's not that bad. You're not pouring milk into it or anything. Okay, anyway, continue. Sorry.
But I was just going to say that I think this idea of what you touched on, Sheri, about music and wine both being things that not everyone has to love, that if you love it, and everybody, knew me in music as being this wine guy, and I constantly get people calling me and say, hey, I'm at this restaurant, is this wine a good wine? And you go, well, do you like it? And they go, yeah, I really do. And I go, then it's a good wine. Yeah. And I think it's the same thing with music, right? People would, do you like this band? And said, yeah, I really love that band. Well, then they're a good band, at least to you in terms of that. It's so subjective. And I think part of the thing is you get people that get caught up on brands and they have to only chase the points or chase some, label that's like, oh, well, it's more of a status thing where it's like I'm drinking a certain wine and therefore this makes me a more successful person or something versus them actually having their own opinion about what it is.
Well, that's how you get cult wine selling for futures for $2,000. You get those major Napa. They're just a trend,
There's no equivalent of that for music. We don't say like, oh, that's the $2,000 music.
Concert tickets these days.
$2,000. Oh, the $2,000 band. Yes.
But actually, music is totally accessible. Whereas
music itself,
wine is also for the most part accessible. I mean, of course, there are limitations with money.
You can't turn on a tap in your car and have wine.
Yeah.
Music is available everywhere.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Truly.
And actually, wine is not, I think people still have this stigma that people say all the time when I'm doing tastings, I'll say like, I really don't know anything about wine, and I only like this kind of thing.
Better.
And it's
that's
like, no,
even better. Great.
All you have to do is like what you like and maybe learn.
And just react emotionally the way you do to music.
Exactly.
Just feel it.
I agree with
and so breaking that down in the music sense is like really helpful. If we could get people to like wine and certainly beer, it's like fine, like beer and music, but like wine and music, yeah.
Wine and not classical music,
Oh, come on. Actually,
in my house here, I only listen to classical music. In my medieval style house on the hill up here, I only listen to Renaissance and a little into Baroque. So I am a classical head. There's nothing but wine and classical. But it is such a cliche, wine and classical, that it's like,
I did. I will say I went to Krug when I visited Champaign recently, and Champaign the region, and they had a whole wine and music pairing that they did. And so they had composed a different piece to go with
let's do that here.
with each wine.
Why not?
And this is based on the work of Charles Spence, who is a professor in experimental psychology at Oxford University. He's done a lot of work with the senses and integrating sound and taste. He has found that people derive 15% more pleasure from wine if they listen to music while tasting it, and the style of the music can affect our perception of wine. Let's take a quick break and visit McMinnville, our episode sponsor. This charming small town is in the heart of Oregon wine country with more than 250 wineries within a 20-mile radius. There are multiple boutique hotels to choose from, as well as outstanding farm-to-table restaurants, art galleries, a terrific farmer's market, very cute shops, and you don't even have to get into your car to taste wine, folks, because you can walk to more than 24 urban winery tasting rooms, not to mention microbreweries and a distillery. Go to visitmcminnville.com to discover more and plan a stay in McMinnville, Oregon. Welcome to the land of plenty. All right, guys, let's move on to our final course here. In music, a vanity label is a record label controlled by a musician. For example, the Beatles had their own label, Apple Records. The Rolling Stones have Rolling Stones Records. Prince founded Paisley Park Records. Jay-Z runs Rock Nation. I could go on and on. Jay-Z also has the champagne brand Armand de Brignac, also known as the Ace of Spades. So I thought I'd kind of make this connection. Courtney Taylor, you have your own wine label. I suppose we could say that some of these musicians who have...
Well, I also had a...
You also
the
had, you also
always
had
have a vanity
your own,
label.
Exactly.
Release
So
our friends that aren't aggressive enough to go find a real label. We just have a cool label, and at least our fans get to hear these.
So you have your
bands,
own record label and you have your own wine label.
I had my own wine label. Yeah, this is Chateau Taylor. Was just this one 2010 vintage. I'm almost out of it, so I should probably do it again. But it's taken me years. I mean, we made 50 cases.
So let's talk about this. Why do musicians feel like they need their own record label and their own wine label? How do you feel about the term vanity label? Is that...
Because I always say this about the wine bar, that if, every addict dreams of being the pusher man. And I suppose it's the same. Isaac had a label, or maybe still does, from Modest Mouse, and he had a bunch of bands that sounded like Modest Mouse on there, and I think we also like community, we like to really keep a community close and interact and spread the love, so to speak, and I think that's why the wine was just because nobody, not even Mexicans, make in Mexico, wine country. They're making wine for filet mignon just like everybody else. Nobody is making wine for spicy food. And Italian food, really, until you get pretty far south, is not spicy. Spanish food is not spicy. French food, absolutely, I'd be horrified at the thought. And, Alsatian, German, Teutonic wines, that's not for spicy food either.
Some would disagree with you, but go on.
So I did a U.S. tour, and I drank wine every day and ate spicy food every day, and tried to figure out what it is that makes it not burn, because it's alcohol. It makes spicy food often burn more, and some don't, and why, and came up with this one cuvee, and then made a ton of it, and been drinking it ever since, mostly on Cinco de Mayo. But to serve a purpose, making a wine to serve a certain culinary purpose was.
But
But otherwise, you're just pushing it,
A lot of vanity labels, though, were there's sort of two different kinds. There were ones that were done for economic reasons.
And you're talking record labels?
I'm talking about record labels,
okay.
Right? An artist getting a vanity label. Sometimes, and I did a lot of deals that were like this, but sometimes they were an economic thing where they just they were able to get a larger portion of the pie by the fact that they had their own label and so forth. And other times it was out of control, about wanting to have more control over certain things that they perceived to them to not have control over. And in many cases that was true. I mean, there was a lot of situations where the record company would make decisions on behalf of the artist and the artist wasn't necessarily all that happy about it. But I think that there's not, the examples you use like Apple or the Rolling Stones label or even Prince's label, Paisley Park had some other artists, but I think that there's those particular examples, like Apple really, I can't remember how many different artists were on Apple, very few, right? It was the Beatles and maybe
Badfinger.
Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly right. And
the Beatles and Badfinger,
Straight up,
that
one
was
of my
it.
favorite albums of all time.
Yeah.
I just can't quite get the name to be able to go on a bottle of wine yet, but I'm working on it.
Wow.
So I think it's interesting. I mean, there are some examples of some very successful vanity labels, but the name vanity label, I think, it came up because it tended to get done. That deal got done because that artist had particular leverage in the marketplace with whether it was with the record label they were on or whatever it was. And so it wasn't necessarily that they had demonstrated this ability to curate fantastic artists and create that, although there are certainly artists who have been very successful at that.
It's interesting, that question of control, because now that to turn the conversation to the vanity wine label, I mean, the reason I understand that Jay-Z purchased the Ace of Spades champagne brand was he was sick and tired of the champagne industry complaining about hip-hoppers, drinking their wine and rapping about their wine, which you would think they would be thrilled but for all the free advertising. So again, it sounds like he purchased the label to sort of control at least one champagne and say, hey, this is the hip hop champagne.
That's an opportunity. He's seizing an opportunity.
He's a very smart guy.
He's a very smart guy.
He's a very, very shrewd businessman too. He's a super, super good guy.
When the first time I went to Walla Walla, I stopped at a winery, and it was owned by Jeff Tate from Queensryche. And he was actually there, and his wine was called Insania, and I bought it at Total Rock label. It's a beautiful label, and I bought a bottle, and it was like, I don't know how much it was. It was under $50, but like not a whole lot. And I have never opened it because I don't really care what it tastes like. It was just such a great, oh wow, here's this package of what someone is wanting to do. When someone else makes the wine for him. That is a vanity wine label,
But
as opposed to
if he drinks the hell out of it, then it's not a vanity wine label. It's just like, I like it this way, and I want a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, one could argue that all these Silicon Valley people that are up in Napa buying these huge, and launching some of the brands that you're talking about, that those are vanity labels. They're vanity labels in a different sense because they're not economically viable in any way, shape, or form. It's really about a lifestyle and wanting to be part of something, and they have the financial leverage to do it. And if it loses a few $1 million a year, then so be it. Because they've got the money to be able to do it. I mean, I would consider that to be a vanity label.
Wanting to be a part of it, that definitely rings a bell with me on our record label. When we don't want to quit our band and join this band of 20-year-olds that are so amazing. We want to, we would love to, that'd be embarrassing. So instead,
that ship has sailed.
No real label is, picking them up, and they're kind of too lazy and groovy and, to really get out there and make it happen. So of course you want to be like, wow, well, let's just put out this record and then we'll be a part of it, and the enjoyment of being part of this other band. I mean, it's really enjoyable to be a member of the Dandy Warhols. It's a fine art, and boy, these cats are good at it. I love being in this band, but I want to be a part of it other bands too. So that is definitely the part of something the silicon in Napa.
I think it's different though as well, like the idea that, so when a vanity label and you're working with different bands, and so there's this thing of sharing and helping, but with wine, for you to have your own wine label involves you, and the idea of something that one is really interested in and again wanting to be a part of, but learning and actually participating in. And I think that that's a little different than record labels. I still say record music labels. In the same way that a lot of musicians that I know participate in other art, visual art, or write books, and that's granted, that's art, but so it can be that way for a musician to get into the wine world of the craft and the art of what is wine and learn more about it. It really is interesting, how it gets to where it is in this bottle,
Sheri, can you take a second and explain the double entendre of your label? What is the pressing plant?
So the pressing plant, it's named that because records are pressed at a pressing plant, and wine is a pressed plant, made from a pressed plant.
I love it.
One of my friends who used to be the label manager at Sub Pop came up with the name, and it wasn't, a lot of the names that had come up before just sounded like too cute, and this makes sense for me,
It's a great name.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. You're pretty consistent on the great names, I must say.
Yeah, you are.
You're thinking about that a lot, huh?
And it also ties into your history.
Nice.
And this is so much, when you're making the wine as you are, you're putting so much of yourself into it. And the fact that this rings so true and authentic with what your history is. And I think that authenticity, whether you're talking about music or wine, is one of the most important characteristics. And you can really smell something that's not authentic. And I think going back to that, Silicon Valley people buying, making these huge wines, they're not in the vineyard. They don't have dirt underneath their fingernails. They're not there at 6 p.m. trying to figure out if this ferments, why this ferment is stuck or whatever it is. And I think that the fact that you're doing all of that, I'm doing all of that, we're in the midst of that, very much hands-on, the authenticity people feel. And, people, when they taste the wine, when they talk to you, when they talk to me, when they even listen to this podcast, you can tell the difference. And that's you have a very good consistency from the name to the labels to what you're actually doing.
Well, one of the things that it also helps me do is that I am like a one-person show. I am the only person in this part of the pressing plant. And so one of the things, it's hard sometimes to put myself out there. It's easier to be behind the scenes and in the production side. But also, I really have never enjoyed the more kind of pretentious side of talking about wine and describing it. And it takes away a lot of the passion for me of like what people taste and being curious about what other people taste. And so for me, naming the wines with different songs allows me to actually, if it gets too highbrow for me to be like, look, it's a bottle of wine. It's $20,
Thank you.
What I can do is I can talk about how much I love Lust for Life. And Iggy Pop is just one of my favorite musicians, and this song really it makes me feel this way, and this is what this vintage was like. And I can talk to people about music, which again brings me back to myself and not trying to sell something, even though when I'm pouring wine for people, obviously I'm there to sell it, but it's to just, again, be my true self. And it's very hard to do that in this world sometimes where we want everyone to like us.
I find when I go out, I did this wine dinner just a month ago, I couldn't talk about the wine. Every time I started talking about the wine, all they wanted to talk about is music. They wanted to talk about the bands. They wanted to talk about IRS records. They wanted to talk about this and that and the other. And I would try to spin it back to, because look, at the end of the day, I was there to turn people on to the wine and hopefully, which they did, but they wanted to talk about music, and that was how they connected with it. And again, it goes back to your authenticity thing. I mean,
did they buy the wine, or
they did? They bought shitloads.
Well, that's all that matters.
Talk more about music, man.
It was all those music people. I thought all I got to do is just find all the people that were into our music and then just go sell them wine. Because
I really want to get into that first industry. When you're in the industry, you start making money. Because when I first got taken out to record label dinners, people trying to sign my band, we weren't on a major label yet. We get flown all over. They're trying to sign us. They're spending $1,000 a bottle on wine, and I didn't like any of it. It wasn't until years later, several years later, I wandered hungover out into a French town that we were playing at, walked into an empty bar with an old man wiping up after lunch, and said, just a glass of red wine, un vin ben rouge, s'il vous plaît. And he said, oh, and what is this? And he gave me bread, no butter, like no burr, sans burr. And so I tasted it. It was a half-empty bottle, so it'd been open for a while. And I just went, finally, because I was so disappointed. I'm a 19th century lit geek, so wine is such a huge part of that and the experience, right? So I wanted to love wine. I knew I was going to be a wine lover. I did not love what record labels bought us for $1,000. This €2
clearly didn't know what they were doing.
€2 glass
in terms of the wine.
€2 glass of wine. And I was it changed my life forever. I said, what is this? And the guy looks at me like I'm the dumbest American in the world. And he goes, Bordeaux. And I was like, oh, that's right, we're playing Bordeaux tonight. Oh, that's a wine. Oh, dude.
I love that.
And that was it. I've been a Bordeaux head ever since.
Okay, that is the perfect note to stop on. Thank you. Did you all notice at the end of the long email I sent you that we do a dessert course at the end of every episode where we go around the table and everyone shares one kind of last thought, something that they've been thinking about this week that relates to food or wine?
There's a podcast that is called Winyl, W-I-N-Y-L, and it is all focused on an interview with either a musician or a winemaker, and the whole talk, and they focus on one album that the guest chose, and then there's a wine guy who picks a wine to go with it, and then they discuss whether or not it went well together. And I just listened to this episode with Jerry Harrison from the Talking Heads.
Great guy.
And it was such a great episode, and he talks about, he was also in the Modern Lovers, and the Modern Lovers, that album is like one of my favorite of all time.
I did not know that.
And,
it's a great bit of...
And he told
a great
stories.
producer after
Yes.
his Talking Heads time, too.
But great stories, and also about Graham Parsons when he died. So anyway, really great episode to listen to.
Of Winyl.
Winyl. Yeah.
Okay.
Check it out.
Well, I will share my dessert, which is I wanted to name a few of my favorite female sommeliers who have backgrounds in music. One of them is Bryn Hegman at Vinnie's Raw Bar in Seattle. She trained as an opera singer, and she said she got into wine because she learned to sight read Romance languages and can pronounce just about any word in any European language, and that's kind of one of the ways she found her way into wine. And then two of my other favorite Lady Soms, Cassandra Felix, head sommelier and beverage manager at the Breakers in Palm Beach, and Raquel Jacobs, head sommelier at Mott 32 in Las Vegas. Both of them started out in dance and found wine. So just so many connections.
Yeah.
Jay, did you bring a dessert item?
What I thought about was how wine and food and music sort of all come together. I love to cook. One of the things that is my greatest sort of times are when I've got a bunch of people coming over to the house, and it's, I've gone to the farmer's market, I've bought all the stuff, and it's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm going to have 2 hours of prepping food by myself. So I open up a bottle of wine, and then I put on some music, and I thought of the two things. Depending on what's going on, I put on Kenny Durham, which is an old jazz guy, called Quiet Kenny, which is an amazing staple jazz record, depending if you want something that's in that mellow thing. And if you're looking for something while you're cooking, before you're making dinner, before your friends get there, put on the New Radicals, which is a little bit of self-serving because it's a band that I signed and was on MCA. But that record changes the environment. It's so up and up-tempo, and you find yourself bouncing around the kitchen listening to this music as you're doing it. And those are sort of, for me, some of the great times in life are when I'm by myself doing that, drinking wine and preparing food, and then having people come over to the house. Because for me, having people at the house and drinking wine and sharing and whatever, I'd much rather do that than go to any restaurant. Those are the things. When we have no teeth, we're rocking on a porch. That's what we're going to be talking about. We're not going to be talking about any of these deals or any of that other stuff. You're going to talk about those interactions with your friends when you're just sitting around hanging out, late at night, cooking food and drinking wine.
I love that, and I'm going to cue those songs up. Thanks.
All right.
Do you have a parting thought for us, Courtney? A recommendation?
A dessert moment. Of all my friends, Jerry Casal from Devo, he has the 5550 winery, great Napa Pinot. He does a great one. But I must say, Les Claypool's champagne is top 3 champagnes I've ever had in my life.
Had it.
And I'm a champagne head. And
What's the label?
I don't remember the name of it, but it's Googleable, right?
We will add that to our social media feed.
Oh,
we'll figure it out.
It
is it champagne or is it sparkling wine?
Oh, it's in
So
champagne. That was the first thing I asked was, what on earth is going on here? Are you serious?
Pachyderm champagne? That's what
I don't think it's called the same thing as his Napa, but maybe he does. I don't know. But boy, the champagne is fantastic,
That's
dude.
great.
It is.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Special thanks to all of you amazing panelists. Sheri Hood, band and label manager turned winemaker. Thank you for being here and sharing your wines with us.
Oh, thanks for asking me. It's fun.
And Jay Boberg, former recording executive, current vintner of fine Oregon Pinot Noir. Thanks for being here.
I like to use the word fine. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here. It was good fun.
And Courtney Taylor, rock star, thank you for hosting us
It's always fun hanging out with a rock star.
at your wine bar. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
I'm glad you liked it.
And if you're enjoying our show and looking for something similar to add to your playlist, check out our friends over at the Manual Podcast. Each episode features a roundtable discussion with experts or artisans in subjects like food, drink, travel, style, trades, and more. Past guests have included Hugh Atchison, Zane Lamprey, and Isaac Toops. Download a new episode every week or check out their more than 100 back episodes on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and all those other good places. And on a personal note, the Manual is supposedly an online men's lifestyle magazine, but I find that their content is just super fascinating every week, so definitely tune in. Today's episode of The Four Top was recorded in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon, at the Old Portland, a wine bar like no other. Our editor, Keelan King, was also our audio tech today, and Keelan also composed and performed our theme music, so I hope you enjoy it. Izzy Kramer...
Oh, man.
Izzy Kramer is our tireless and multi-talented producer. Special thanks to the web staff at OPB who bring our show to life on the Oregon Public Broadcasting website, as well as a thank you to sound supervisor Stephen Cray. You can check out our dedicated website, thefourtop.org, to learn more about us, listen to back episodes, donate to the show, and reach out to us on social media. And if you have not already subscribed to The Four Top on iTunes, NPR One, or Spotify, please help us out and subscribe and leave a rating while you're there. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Cheers.